happy again to be on this panel, and I got to start off with an apology. I am not of great voice tonight. Be feeling a little bit under the weather, and you know, last week I felt great, and then I was asked to put my thoughts together about where we've been, what we're doing, and where we're going, and after I did that and sat down, then that's when the symptoms started coming in. And I went straight downhill. It was coughing and sneezing and watery eyes, and I don't know, maybe I was crying. I don't know what the story was. But you know, it went down so fast. It was almost like the fourth quarter of 2008. It went down so fast that I felt I needed some medical attention. And I don't use local doctors. I go to Washington, D.C. So, of course, I asked Dr. Ben Bernanke, what would he do to solve my problem? And he said, hey, it's pretty clear. Plenty of fluids, a lot of water, pots of tea. Basically, he wanted to flood my system with liquidity. That was his first approach. And you know, I felt good. It really felt good. I felt getting stabilized. But you know, I think this was so dangerous that I didn't go for one doctor. I went to a second doctor in D.C., and that was Dr. Larry Summers. And you know, he looked at me and he said, you know, that liquidity stuff's great, glad you have it, but this is a two-pronged approach you need here. You need to spend some, you got to throw some money at this problem. So he wrote up, so he gave me some suggestions, go down to CVS, and they started out okay. I mean, he said, Sudafed, and not that stuff that's in the aisle, in the back of the CVS where you get fingerprinted and you get your Sudafed Max. So I went with that. That sounded good. And he said, you know, but that's not going to be enough either. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and what we got to do is take some extraordinary measures. So he suggested that I go down the into aisle 3, and that's where they have the patient-ready immune system infrastructure products. And he didn't give me any specifics. You know, I was just walk down that aisle and pick out a couple of stuff, make sure it's expensive, and the crazier the better. You know, so, hey, he's the doc. He's from he's from the oldest school, right? Not the second oldest school. So let's see what I came up with. I went with this Z-Cam, right? That was probably like $7 or $10. Citrus flavor. Zinc. This is the magic formula in here. You got a lot of zinc. And yeah, you got to trust your body. I know that I don't have enough zinc in my body, so I knew that this was probably something I should do. So I went with that one. And then I found another one, airborne formula, right? Sort of bubbles up when you put it in water and you drink it down. But the best part, it was created by a second-grade school teacher. And I said, you know, that's that crazy thing that I'm looking for. So let's spend a little money on some crazy stuff. Right? So I take the stuff home, and I sort of had second thoughts, and I called Larry back, Dr. Summers back up, and I said, you know, I'm a little bit off-put by this idea. You really think I should take this stuff? I don't have any experience taking supplements like this to improve my health. And he said, don't worry. I don't have any experience prescribing this type of stuff either. So, you know, so I took it, and I'm waiting around trying to get better. And I started thinking about economic doctors trying to fix a problem that they really haven't seen. Nothing in my personal history that I went down so quickly on this one. And there's nothing in their recent history, at least, of the United States, of the economy they've been creating rules for and writing prescriptions for decades. There's no experience of creating policies to get out of this one, a debt overhang, debt deflation environment. And so when you're looking as an economist, one of the good things about being sick was I got to sit home and read, and I'm reading a lot of financial history lately, and what you do is you try to get some insight by looking at these types of crises wherever they appear. It's not going to be in the US, and it's not going to be in the recent time. But if you can find a sample of these types of crises that involve real estate speculation, banking excesses, and banking difficulties and crises and bailouts, perhaps you do learn a little bit about what lies ahead of us. And I think there's a really nice preliminary investigation into these questions by a husband-wife team of economists, Carmen and Vincent Reinhardt. Carmen is from the University of Maryland, and Vincent is from the American Enterprise Institute. And the paper's called After the Fall. And what it does is it looks across a number of crises in different countries, 5 developed countries and a set of 10 emerging market economies, where they had this sort of real estate debt bubble and collapse, and tried to figure out, well, what happens in the decade, what happened in the decade leading up, and what happens in the decade after the crisis started. And I just want to give you, this is why I got sick. Real GDP growth per capita, decade before, 3.1%, decade after, 2.1%. Now, down 1% per year. That's a lot. That's a third of your growth for a decade, not for a year, for a decade. Unemployment rate, 2.7% in the decade before, 7.9% in the decade after. That's up 5%. Inflation, 6.5% in the decade before, 2.2% in the decade after, down 4%. So low growth, high unemployment, and disinflation. Real housing prices after 10 years. Typically, housing prices peak the year before the crisis falls apart. Housing sort of, it led you into it, and it sort of starts to lead you out. 10 years after, the median level was only 83%, the real level of 83% of the peak. So inflation helps you a little bit out, but in terms of real prices, you were still 83% of the peak after a decade. So housing doesn't bounce back to the peak. There was something wrong with the peak, right? And in terms of a broader sample of countries, the typical experience of this boom-bust was a 10-year boom, 10-year credit-fed boom where debt as a ratio to GNP was growing. And after the bust, a 7-year period of this deleveraging, a 7-year period of debt destruction. So now you'll probably all need some. I do have some of this stuff left that you can take on the way out. But I think the lessons are, this is not over by some quick fix, and whether we push the button for, $500 million or $1 billion of stimulus or $700 billion of stimulus, it's not going to fix anything. We've got a problem. The problem is going to be persisting. And I think we have to design some policies that are consistent with our long-run health, and hope the short run takes care of itself. So I think we have some huge problems. And the biggest problem, or the biggest thing we face, is the need for the private sector to destroy some debt. We've got to get rid of the debt overhang in the private sector so that restore the consumer's balance sheet. That process is underway. It goes underway by defaulting on debt. That's happening. I'm not advocating you go out and default on your debt tomorrow, but I'm saying that's part of the process. Write-downs of the debt to reflect its true value. And also hate to say it, saving, raising the savings rate out of your income. 2005, in the midst of our bubble, we had a U.S. savings rate of about 1% of income. And we did that because everybody's cashing their ATM using their home equity loans. You didn't feel you needed to save on year by year out of income. Well, we're making some progress. Right now, the savings rate is between 5 and 6% of income. And if we want to get back to a long-run health, it better be between 8 and 10% of income. We got to get back to we did that in the 70s and the 80s, and we got away from it. So there sort of needs to be an economic tithing that goes on, where we have a balance between our current consumption and what we're saving and investing for future generations and future growth. So there's a lot of balancing that needs to be done. It's not going to be done overnight. The evidence seems to be this process takes a long time. That's the bad news. The good news, it really does take a lot to keep this economy from growing. And we make babies, and we have new ideas. So I think, there's long-run confidence that things are going to move forward. Just the pace, don't expect the pace to be all that fast over the next few years while we right the ship.